Welcome back. Welcome back. Let us continue this formidable space traffic management conference. Great stuff so far. Yesterday, today, the excitement continues, and I'm going to be moderating the questions and answers for this next session that deal with behavior incentivizing, monitoring, and assessment. So the way that we're going to do this is I'm going to call on the participants of this session to spend 1 minute refreshing everybody's memory on the contribution that you're making to the session with your paper. Just kind of summarize it, just 1 minute to kind of summarize that contribution. And then we can open it up for questions and answers. And I'm just going to read down the list. So we're going to just start with Taeyoung.
Hi, my name is Taeyoung Kim, and I'm a graduate student from KAIST, South Korea. And it's really honored to be able to attend here. So, and I appreciate to Dr. Jah for giving me this opportunity. My paper is about preliminary data-driven time series classification of GEOs in angular momentum domain using the convolutional neural network. There are two main highlights of this paper. First, it was possible to classify GEO activity and their thruster characteristics through actual daily data set. This data set is based on the JSON data set, which is obtained from Astrograph. And before using the data set for CNN, the validity was verified by comparison with WAS dataset. And secondly, by domain transformation, it was verified that CNN can be trained through these robust angular momentum patterns, and the cell-like classification was possible in the angular momentum domain instead of using 6 1D time series data sets, which means orbital elements. So therefore, through this transfer learning technique, the three classes of their orbit maneuvers about their activity and the types of used thrusters are effectively classified. So that was my research. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Taeyoung. Great to have you here. Let's go with Stijn.
Okay, thanks. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Stijn Lemmens. I'm an analyst for the European Space Agency. And within this panel and within this session, there's actually one bridge I would like to make, and that is to go from data we get from a surveillance system all the way to what it means for the space debris environment, and hence the environment we try to keep sustainable. So in a nutshell, the paper describes, first of all, the fantastic improvements which we have seen in the SST world and also discussed in the previous, let's say, session, which make it possible to measure what the individual actors globally and neutrally are doing with respect to, for example, post-mission disposal, so taking the stuff out of orbit after the mission is over. That is nice because whether they do this or not directly influences how the future environment is going to evolve. So this type of behavior we quantify and integrate out over the entire population, and then link with another tool, which is in the space debris community called long-term environment simulations, which try to predict how disastrous the world will look in 200 years or not. So we take the data set of monitors, we combine this with a risk methodology, and we link this to what the amount of risk we're taking will imply for future sustainability, and in this way try to incentivize every little actor to do their bit to avoid this fate. And that's it in a nutshell.
Excellent. I appreciate that, Stan. Thank you so much. Let's go with Minoo.
So thanks, Moriba, and hello, everyone. My name is Minoo Rathnasabapathy, and I'm here today on behalf of the Space Sustainability Rating Consortium that consists of the World Economic Forum, the European Space Agency, the University of Texas at Austin, Bryce Space and Technology, and of course, MIT. Over the past 2 years, the SSR Consortium have been working on the design and the development of the SSR, which we see as a novel rating system to address the orbital challenge by incentivizing actors to design missions that are sustainable, as well as consider responsible operations in the space environment. So the SSR, if you haven't heard of it as yet, is made up of 6 modules. I won't go into too much depth here, but some of the modules include data sharing, collision avoidance, standards and regulations, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea is to rate each mission at different life cycles of the mission, from early design through to in-orbit operations, as well as disposal. So the work that's presented here at the conference provides examples of how mission operators can be recognized and can score points for actions and choices made at each stage of the mission, and also what drives some of these choices. So really happy to be part of the conference and the discussion, and looking forward to taking questions later.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let's go with Maria. You're muted, by the way.
Thanks. Now it's good. So thanks so much for having me. As always, such a great event. And thank you for the organizers. And also thanks for bearing with me on antitrust. So why antitrust? Is because we have fragmentation in international law, in space law, in the governance of both the space sector and also in antitrust, as you could see within my presentation, which was like 17 minutes long, and also with fragmentation within STM. So it can be considered as a crisis, all this fragmentation, but we could also embrace this as an opportunity and look for alternatives in terms of regulation. So since space is becoming so much privatized and commercialized, I think that we should take into account the rise of lex mercatoria, or the commercial law, and look into the alternatives related. In this case, it would be antitrust. Now, the main issue of antitrust is it still very politicized, but we could look into further recommendations on how to depoliticize it so it could benefit the commercialization of the space ecosystem. So that's about it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Ruvimbo.
Hello, everyone. So nice to be here. My name is Ruvimbo Samanga. I'm a space law and policy analyst. I'll start by giving a little anecdote. 4th of September, the president of the US signed Space Policy Directive number 5, which establishes a set of principles designed to protect the nation's valuable space assets from a burgeoning variety of cyber threats. This was done in acknowledgement of the fact that Americans, like many other nationalities, rely on capabilities provided by space systems on a daily basis, which highlights the need to preserve their functionality and systems. So as we continue to rely on cyber technologies, the risk of cyber attacks also increases. States can no longer then afford to take a passive approach to assume that, well, if it hasn't happened to my network, it won't happen probably. So what I suggest then is an international framework and a new policy, a dedicated legal instrument which will protect space systems from cyber vulnerabilities and malicious attacks, providing a whole-of framework to safeguard space assets and critical infrastructure, such as the need, for example, intra-sector collaboration, information sharing, enterprise risk management, encryption, supply chain management, and more. At the end of the day, the use of regulations, rules, and guidance to enhance implementation of cybersecurity measures will adopt or help us to adopt best practices and norms of behavior in outer space, that encompass conceptions of what I call new neutrality, as well as legal and technical measures to ensure that we have a safe, secure, and sustainable space domain.
Thank you so much for that. Last but not least, Nevin.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nevin Simone. I'm an aerospace engineering graduate student at the University of Texas at Austin, and I'm representing a team between UT and the Texas Advanced Computing Center. And our work was largely comprised of going to the United Nations Satellite Registry website, pulling down all of their satellite registration documents, those sent by states to the UN, and scraping them for as much detail as we could get. And once we had that detail, we ingested it into Astriograph. So our work is working to expand Astriograph's capabilities. And then from that data, we pulled out registration trends, both by just looking at the UN data and also cross-checking with other sources that we have within Astriograph. And from those trends, we came up with a reasonably simple scheme to give a registration or a rating system, a rating value to each country based on their registration trends.
Excellent. So Nevin, thank you so much for that. And with that said, looks like we have one question here. So let's see. So the question is, on depoliticizing distrust, how do you propose to decouple space surveillance and tracking, or SSA, from politics when space is inherently politicized, rightly or wrongly? Anybody?
So if I could jump in, just to give a little bit of a start in the discussion. In my case, what I propose is to depoliticize antitrust. Antitrust is competition law. And why am I saying this? Because space traditionally used to be a domain of sectoral regulation, because it was mostly international law and between public governmental actors. But now, given this privatization, increasing privatization and commercialization, we need to address the market differently, with a different set of regulation. And the commercial law and transnational law is increasing in space. Therefore, I'm proposing competition law, because infrastructure is also changing in terms of STM. You could have STM infrastructures becoming more and more digitalized, and important private actors could also look into that market, because I know for a fact important companies are looking on this market share of STM services, for instance, and then you'd have to see that no particular commercial actor takes the lead up to becoming a monopoly or an oligopolistic challenge. So oligopolistic challenge. So that's why I'm proposing that we have to desectoralize the space domain and look into alternative regulation.
Thank you for that. Here's a question related to the space sustainability rating. So the question is, will operators have to commit to stay in the space sustainability rating throughout their mission, or will they be able to leave if they're not happy with it? Do you expect to have sufficient demand from operators for the rating? So clearly this is for Minoo, but certainly open to anybody else who has comments. But let's start.
So thank you very much for the question. So on the side of demand, yes, absolutely. We think that there will be a demand from operators to be part of the SSR. We're actually doing a market analysis at the moment, and we're also looking for an entity that will be the administrator of the SSR. So we believe that it is a long-term process for this administrative organization, but from the actors and stakeholders that we've spoken to, from government, industry, academia, as well as trade associations, we definitely believe that there is market there, and there's a need for this to be implemented. With regarding for actors or players who want to be committed or should be committed to the whole life cycle of the mission, yes, ideally we would have the actor have the SSR at the or obtain the SSR at the very end of the life cycle of their mission. They will be given a rating at different stages of the mission, but we expect them and we really are hoping that they will stay on for the whole life cycle of the mission to really benefit of the incentives of the SSR.
Excellent. Does anybody else have anything else that they'd like to contribute to that? All right. Well, so let me ask this question. I would say that, I don't know, my perception is that it seems that most people would agree that one of the biggest culprits of the preponderance of, debris and these sorts of things is a lack of compliance with mitigation guidelines and that sort of stuff. I'd like to hear people's ideas on if you could do a single thing or a couple of things to incentivize compliance, what might those things be?
If I may, I would jump a moment on your
Oh,
question,
please.
Moriba.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
And maybe to follow on what Minoo just said. So something which unfortunately or fortunately works in human nature is just bringing things transparently forward. That's why I'm also such an enthusiast of having more surveillance systems, higher quality data, which is already geared towards real use rather than expert use, which makes it blatantly obvious when something is not going according to plan, either intentionally or non-intentionally. In order to, let's say, increase our commitment to guidelines, or for some countries, these are no guidelines, these are requirements. So it's a need before you go into orbit. There needs to be a feedback loop. You can only do so much upfront. An incentivization in the frame of showing what the result is one thing. The other thing would be also let's say, request to the legislator to go back to what they have licensed. And I'm happy that you also are now looking into the registration database. Practically under the registration convention, you should also register when you dispose your satellites. I would be very interested in seeing how many actors effectively do that and take their international obligation seriously. So making this transparent, visible, by having data algorithms and the surveillance means to do so, I think is the first step towards a better environment.
Thanks for that, Stijn. So anybody else?
Yeah, I can have some input here. I think, a healthy dose of peer pressure and public pressure can be a good thing in certain instances. I feel like you'd agree with that, Dr. Jah. And as part of our work, we have been adding on to an astrograph compliance website for various ways in which a state or an object needs to be compliant with regulations. And part of the scheme is to be able to show, based on queries to Astrograph's database, a set of objects that are either compliant or non-compliant, and to be able to, when data sharing agreements allow, show that to the public, and to be able to do that analysis without needing direct input from state actors. So providing this information from this institution or others, I think would be a very powerful source.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Anybody else have ideas on incentivizing compliance?
And Moriba,
I'd like to, sorry,
Oh.
go ahead.
Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. It's great that so many people have so many opinions to add to here. So I'd also just like to add my 2 cents by pointing people to my presentation for this conference as well, where we, as part of the SSR, have also reached out to stakeholders to think about what are their incentives of being part of a rating system, and why would they want to do this, and why would they want to really incentivize compliance. One thing I think we have to think about is, of course, the financial and the economic incentives for a number of different players in the industry. We also want to think about the great work that's happening at UN COPUS, the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. They have a number of guidelines that's been accepted. And so what we want to do is make sure that there's an even playing field for new actors. And I think that really stresses the need for compliance, but definitely the financial and economic side needs to be addressed here.
Thank you, Minoo. Ruvimbo.
I definitely resonate with everything Minoo has said with regards to we need to look at what is the incentive, and the incentive at the end of the day is the use and exploration of the outer space resource. And I believe to that extent, then how we can enforce compliance is to restrict use and exploration to the extent that states are not abiding by certain guidelines and they're harmfully interfering with the use and exploration of other states. And you might wonder then, how is this practically enforceable in light of the existing authorities and mechanisms that we have? Well, I would then suggest a study into the feasibility of, for instance, a lower Earth orbit spacecraft, which can perform in-orbit inspection of a non-cooperative target. And this also includes how to perform contactless restrictions to the mission capabilities of this non-cooperative target. So that is otherwise known as a soft deny. And obviously to accomplish this, we would require some form of rendezvous approach and system long-range identification in order to analyze the use of the spacecraft and essentially neutralize it if it is interfering or causing harmful interference to the operations of another state. I think even more so than that, if we're looking at economic incentivization, I would hope that there'd be some kind of central governing authority for not only space traffic management, but cybersecurity, which operates along the model, say, of the WHO, which is a voluntary cash contribution, which goes towards the development of the sector. And if a state is found not to be in compliance, then it's simply a matter of withdrawing the amount of support they get economically. We know that a lot of companies rely on government bonds and government security to undertake space operations, which are expensive, and you're expecting a return. So in order to have that financial feasibility, states will want to comply in order to get that return on their investment, or companies will want to get the return on their investment. So I think it's twofold. I think there can be economic sanction, there can be technical sanction. I suppose policy sanctions have been rendered a little bit redundant at this point, but the point of having the policy, I guess, is for coordination and for all the users to be certain and aware of their obligations.
That was a great answer. Loved it. Loved it. Thank you so much, Ruvimbo. So one question is, okay, what is the role of space insurance in incentivizing compliance, and how do we bring the space insurance companies in? What is it? I mean, it hasn't happened yet. So what do you think is preventing that? What could we as a community do to facilitate or enable space insurance in having a role to incentivize compliance? Anyone?
I'm happy to take a stab at this one and start the conversation off. So again, with regard to the space sustainability rating, one of the groups of stakeholders we've been talking to are also insurance companies. And the idea behind the rating system is to have sort of a one definition of what does sustainability in space actually mean. And so by having a higher rating, you could then potentially go to an insurance company and then negotiate a discount, saying that you've ticked all of the boxes where you've thought about the pre-design phase of your mission, the operations phase of your mission, as well as disposal. So I think that's one way that we're directly working with insurance companies and also the administrative organization of the SSR, potentially working with these insurance companies, again, to offer that financial and economic drive in order to push compliance on a global scale.
Thank you for that, Minoo. Anybody else?
Yep. So a while back here at the University of Toulouse, we made a presentation on space insurance. And the problem is that there's not so much mandatory on-orbit liability or on-orbit servicing insurance out there. So one key thing, or solution should I say, is to make it mandatory on-orbit liability, mandatory on-orbit insurance. And that could help increase the market of insurance. Although many space actors are against it as of now, but I don't know in the States, but in Canada and in France, insurance is mandatory when you drive, and therefore the market is more prosperous. Propose the same thing in space.
Thank you.
If I may,
Anybody? Yeah.
can follow up on that with a moment, because yeah, it's true. I mean, we sell insurances for going up into orbits to protect yourself against the launcher breaking up, sometimes in orbits to protect against component failure. But so far, there's very little when it comes to protecting yourself against liability. Also, not in the least because the liability regime is so difficult to comply with, of course. On the other hand, we're really transitioning from the last 10 years from an epoch where a collision on orbit was a rarity, and debris was caused by intentional actions, to a world where we have to start as operators actively avoid other operators rather than debris, because there's so many, let's say, larger constellations, diversified players in the field, and it becomes essentially rather messy at the moment. So this is the ingredients for an accident waiting to happen, and being proactive of this also for insurance, looking into what it effectively would cost to insure such a case, and making this known to the community, I think would also be rather beneficial as maybe a pre-step towards making it mandatory.
Cool. Anybody else?
I would just like to give a little analogous regime, I suppose, that's in operation on the ISS, and that's with regards to civil liability in any of the modules. Civil liability is actually not allowed when it comes to the ISS because it's such an international domain, and for the sake of continuity of operations, they prefer that any case of civil liability is settled amicably. Whereas criminal and other kinds of laws like intellectual property law operate as normal, civil liability for the sake of sustainability is kept as a neutral playing ground. And I believe when we're dealing with a domain as tenuous as outer space, we might have to adopt this kind of attitude where we avoid unnecessary litigation, we avoid causing unnecessary geopolitical issues, and we rather encourage states to find their own independent insurance, or sorry, private companies to find their own independent insurance mechanisms in order to safeguard, because we see the growing trend in insurance policies as far as space is concerned is beginning to include different aspects, such as not only the design, the build, the operation, but also the on-orbit servicing. So it'll then be the responsibility of the state or the private company to take control over their space assets and to seek that requisite security as an international responsibility to ensure space remains a functioning and continuous ecosystem where geopolitical relationships are maintained, essentially.
Thank you so much, Ruvimbo. So is there anything that I didn't ask people that they wish I would have asked them in closing? Okay, sounds like maybe that's a no. So look, I want to go ahead and well, Michael Maloney has a question here. I don't know that we'll be able to get to it, but he says many mitigation rules impact the cost to operators, some more than others. Should we exempt any entities from meeting mitigation rules to allow for very low cost missions?
No.
Thank you. So you know, I figured that might be the answer, but good that somebody else gave it. And so with that, I want to say thank you to each and every one of you for being part of this session. Some great discussions. There's a lot of questions still in the Q&A, so feel free to answer those if you will. And we are going to take a short break, and we'll be back here in about 10 minutes. Where we'll go through the last roundtable of this conference on space security, and it's going to be moderated by Carrie Christensen. So let's take a 10-minute break. Thank each and every one of you very much. And